Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Welcome to a journey into the mind and the mystic. Today I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Shauheen Etminan, a visionary who marries the ancient wisdom of Eastern medicine with the cutting-edge discoveries of modern science. As the founder of Ancestral Magi and VCENNA, Dr. Etminan is at the forefront of exploring how sacred plants and their psychoactive compounds, particularly beta-carbolines, can revolutionize our approach to mental health. These compounds, found in plants like Espand, also known as Syrian rue, have been used ceremonially for millennia to enhance mindfulness, promote longevity, and foster deep spiritual experiences. In our discussion, we will talk about how these ancient practices are supported by modern neuroscience, creating potent natural supplements that maintain a legal status while offering profound therapeutic benefits. Join us as we uncover the secrets of ancestral botanicals and how they transform our understanding of well-being and consciousness, and as we decode the mystic messages of the past to navigate the complexities of the modern world. Shauheen, welcome to the Superhumanize podcast. It is great to reconnect with you again after meeting you in person a little while ago. Wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you, Ariana. It's my pleasure to be finally on your amazing Superhumanize podcast. I was looking into see what superhuman is and superhuman. Basically, superhumanization, bring me as like a superhuman is a very interesting intersection.
Yes, for sure. And superhumanize is also, in essence, a call to action, as well as an offering via the information and the life's work of the amazing guests that we get to have here, like yourself, that we share. I have expressed it before. I firmly believe in a humanity 2.0, and we are at a crossroads. And I'm a chronic optimist, you could say. I believe that the next evolutionary step of humanity is a beautiful one where we actually are evolving into stewards of this earth, into true family of one another and working for the greater, better good. And that's why I am so passionate about sharing the work, the philosophy, the beingness of humans such as yourself who are facilitating this evolutionary step.
Amen to all. It's a very beautiful vision, and I guess we are working for the same reasons.
Absolutely, yes, Shauheen. And you are doing some really incredible work. I'm especially fascinated about how you are basically reviving or bringing into the consciousness some ancient spiritual and medicinal practices and validating them through modern scientific methods. Before we dive into that and talk all things opening up consciousness and psychedelics, I would love for yourself to briefly introduce yourself to our audience and also share with us how not only your mission, but how you got to where you are now.
Absolutely. I was born in Iran, Tehran, and then I moved to Canada when I was 23. And I say that like I'm lived as the bridge between East and West, and I really enjoy basically that as somebody who has this feeling and maybe the obligation of bringing the two sides more together. So my background, I was grown up in a family that was, like say, after revolution, that was not with the narrative of, let's say, the religious narrative that goes through Iran. We always were secular, but being an Iranian, you are exposed to, especially through literature, poetry, like to some level of mysticism. So having these mystical tendencies behind what I was processing as I was growing up was always there, even from when I was 7 or 8. But like from some time to time, because of, let's say, the period of the life that you're going through, it seems like a little bit faded. But I got into basically study as an engineer, a chemical engineer. That was the time that I moved to Canada. I pursued basically grad school, did my master's and PhD in chemical engineering. And then, I just basically started working for a few years as a researcher for government. And after that, then I basically embarked on my own journey as a social entrepreneur. So basically human connection is what I feel it's very easy for me, because I think that I found myself that I can have this empathy with people, understand their emotions easy. And I was very successful with a non-for-profit that I had. And it was in the diaspora, basically just working with diaspora, which the Iranian diaspora is pretty divided. And there's a lot of mistrust and distrust that's rooted because of different narratives that has gone after, specifically after revolution. And reuniting them through different activity was something that at the point, I think it was just like a little challenge that I had a non-for-profit, but it was very successful because then I worked with a lot of volunteers, and it grew, and it became like up to, let's say, leading a team of 150 volunteers that they were working for free, and it was just like out of inspiration. And so with that, I felt that this is something that I have this drive, for doing something bigger than myself. But at the same time, basically just my education was on engineering. I was exposed to the energy industry, which is totally against my soul. And I tried to work and maybe make some changes at the very beginning, but I realized that's not the way to do it. So I left in 2016. I left my job and kind of started working on tech businesses. That was the time I moved to the US, to Silicon Valley. I started with a company, worked for a few years, and then it's basically just like doing the exploration, finding the product market fit about what you want to do and the next big thing. But in 2019, basically my background somehow came together through working on a startup that was basically working on building technology for plant extraction. And just having my background in mass transfer, which is basically a very big section in chemical engineering, I learned and I knew how to build a technology to extract the active compounds, like the therapeutic compounds, from the matrices of the plants in a very high yield and high throughput. And so this is 2019. At the same time, the space started to become more visible. And this is right before COVID. And being in Canada at the time and exposure to psychedelics, specifically just Canada is very lenient on mushrooms and in general, like being on the BC side also. I did some experimentation with different active compounds and extraction. And I built basically a machinery that I patented for, basically this is for extraction of any small molecule from the body of the plants, and it very agnostic to which part of the plants it was. So this is where basically my company VCENNA started. But at the same time, VCENNA is actually coming from the name of Avicenna, which your audience may know. He is known as basically the father of the pre-modern medicine. Like his books was used in Europe for many years. And it's interesting. Interestingly, his book is written in Arabic, even though he was Persian, but the language of science at the time was Arabic. So I was before doing this, I was in Iran. I went to Hamadan, which is where the tomb of Avicenna is. And I knew that I want to do something as getting that lineage of, I would say, the symbiosis of human and plants, because that was like what he actually did 1,000 years ago. And like psychedelics in general is mind expansive compounds. They came together, and at the beginning, the idea was to just see what type of plant we can work with. But then I got into more of the anthropological side to study. And in 2021, we expanded to become basically a drug discovery and development company. That was the time that many of the psychedelic companies also emerged and on basically multiple compounds. And medicalization was the route to bring a product to market, which is very expensive, is very capital intensive, and the success rate is actually very low. But we also we were one of those companies. Our focus was, VCENNA's focus was only on natural compounds. Basically, the idea was bringing the Eastern medicine, which is always a mixture of different compounds, and then bring that as basically new formulations that are, everything is plant driven, and then basically take that into FDA for DSM, like psychiatry manual pathologies. So when you want to take something to FDA, you have to have a specific pathology in your basically drug proposal. So even just bringing all these together, and I guess that was when my engineering and my empathy side, was very interesting, because I guess the understanding of pathology is a lot of time. When you go, for example, to DSM, is just there's 1, 2, 3, and then items, and then they say that you feel like this is disorder. But for me, it was mostly my experience with people in my life that went through difficult time. And it's a very first-hand experience of working with, for me, it was with PTSD, it was with addiction for many years of my very close people to me. And it was very inspiring for me just to be able to make compounds or drugs that can be helpful for them, and then have the language and the science to back it up.
And let's talk about some of these compounds, because what you are doing is so interesting, Shauheen. You are basically integrating ancient knowledge from what you started talking about from Avicenna, and also based on Zoroastrian texts. So you're combining this ancient knowledge with modern pharmacological techniques. And so you're taking plants or compounds that are deeply steeped in spiritual and mystical traditions into the modern times to help those of us who are suffering with some of the most prevalent ailments of the modern times to relieve this suffering. And I would like to talk in more details about some of these compounds. The psychoactive alkaloids they're beta-carbolines, right? Such as the Peganum harmala. Can you talk about this in particular, and also about the neurological health properties and how you see this, or what you've witnessed, particularly with dealing with mental health issues?
Absolutely. I guess one way to read, there are two sides that we want to connect. One is all these, let's say, pathologies and what we can really contribute to. And then the other side is the compound and what they can do. In the realm of drug development, is a very multidisciplinary area. Just to do this very effectively, this is something that you can, let's say, bring different testings from, let's say, running simulations, which we call it in silico modeling, to, let's say, in vitro, which is basically on petri dish, and then on a human, and in animal, and then in human. But in general, what actually took me to understand and learn about beta-carbolines was basically a study of the anthropological side of study. That my inspiration came really from Dennis McKenna and what he does with McKenna Academy. And that was the time that I started basically looking into some of the ancient psychoactives from the East, which then when you get to Iran, before Islam, there was Zoroastrianism, where it was in Iran for about 1500 years, not as a religion, mostly as a philosophy. Only later on, it was a religion. And the priests in Iran, they had this potion that they were making, and it's documented in many of these texts, in Avesta and also in Gatha, that basically they were mixing different plants, and then the potion was called Homa, and the Homa was being taken to have access to the realm of afterlife. Basically, it was a spiritual potion or elixir. And it's not very metaphorical. It exactly tells, for example, there are texts that it says, let's say, how many cups, for example, was taken in this specific experience. And there were at least 5 stories with very detailed story that goes through these rituals. So looking into When you look into Homa, basically the sister of Homa is Soma in the Veda or Hindu culture. That if you look into the research, there have been 200 years of speculation about what was Homa. Some refer to Homa, Soma, including Trans McKenna, all the 60s, ethnopharmacologists or ethnobotanists. And they look at it sometimes from a more metaphorical aspect. They also see it as a god or deity. And there's also the other side, which was a potion, and which knew that it was intoxicating. It had this inebriating effect for spiritual purposes. So for us, one way to look at this was basically just see where we could find the most reliable referrals. And the most reliable referrals was when we separated the Soma Homa, because Iran and India, they had two different flora, hence two different plant, let's say coverage. And that was the time that we were focused on, we knew that, okay, these are out. For example, for Homa or Soma, they are referring to Amanita muscaria as one of the compounds, but that's mostly around Soma, if it's going to be true. But in Iran, Amanita muscaria is not growing, or if it's growing, there's very little areas, not on the east side of Iran. That was the point that looking into basically going very thoroughly into this ancient text and then finding out what are the referrals to the subjective experience of taking these intoxicants, how they felt, what was the effect. So this was
what about these effects?
Yeah, the interesting side, basically maybe the overall effect that's been related to, first of all, there are two words that specifically refer to subjective experience. It's very interesting. There is a stard. So a stard is this experience of having your mind immediately scroll into broader consciousness. And there is another word which is very difficult to pronounce. We call it kafena or khafena, which is this trance-like sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Not sleeping is trance-like sleep, you are tripping when you are sleeping. And then when the referral also, for example, to Zarathustra, which was the prophet or the main philosopher, his experience also, for his revelation, there are documentation that it also came through Homa. And when he is when he wake up from this revelation, you feel basically there are words of him relating to his dream. So this dreamy state, which is not necessarily dream, is somewhere between dream and wakefulness. So this transitional liminal state is what is this domain of having access to higher consciousness in that time of Iran. And then when I later on studied, for example, the after Zoroastrian lineage of mysticism in Iran is Sufism. And Sufism also looking to this liminal state as where you have access to the higher consciousness. Mm-hmm. So it was never even though it was intoxicating, we don't know what was the intoxication like. We know that when they were, for example, they refer as at least for 3 stories, is that they were taking this and they were lying on the bed and they were sleeping for 3 days or 7 days while they were chanting, these hymns, and they were keeping fire by them. They were the body was being watched. And then when they were waking up, they had this very immense realization or enrollment to the teachings, or what was, for example, the reason that they were enrolled to take the experience. So these revelations that they had, and then there were transcription of their experience.
Mm-hmm. So, and what are some of the plants? So not just the actives, but what were some of the plants that were preferably used to induce these states back then?
Yeah, so we know that Homa means to press out. So it means that the Magi or the priests of Zoroastrian time, they knew what it was. So they were really pharmacologists. So they were, and based on what I read and I go even more deeper, it seems that there were different potions in different settings. It was not only one setting. So they knew what to offer. So they were offering it mostly, it was within the caste. It was, first of all, it was being offered to priests as a test of priesthood. If you were really going through this as an ordeal, you were the righteous. You could just handle this. You didn't have anything to to imposter, imagine.
And I think this
then-
was really important to highlight, because this is not about getting high and taking a trip. This is truly considered divine work.
Yeah.
And it is work. It is not for the uninitiated. It's not to be taken lightheartedly and be consumed irreverently, just how somebody might throw back a 6-pack of beer on the weekend. This is completely different world.
Different work. Yeah, absolutely. And there are two more stories. That one of them, they were ordeals. Like they were, and it was not an easy experience. For example, like there is the story about Vishwas, which was the king during Zarathustra, that he actually offers him this potion that he then had this 3 days out of body. Basically, they were out of body experiences. And then they were initiated. And when they were back, they knew something. So the consciousness had shifted already after being back. But when you look into the flora of Iran, there are a few plants, and there are also plants that, for example, Zoroastrian priests today, they are using it. So these plants, one of them that are being still used, but the effect doesn't really make sense with that effect, is ephedra. And the compounds are ephedrine or norephedrine.
Yes.
For your audience, if they want to know what the experience is like, the experience is pretty similar to MDMA. So like the receptor binding profile is very similar to MDMA. It's also scheduled compounds in the United States. The other group of compounds that it seemed that it was obscured over time, and there is a reason for that, maybe I can refer to that later, is actually another plant which is called Syrian rue, or we call it Espand. So Iranians, we all have Espand in our house. We have it as a sacred plant. We burn it for like reverting the evil's eye. And barely knowing that this is a very heavy psychoactive compound. And interestingly, basically the Syrian rue has the same compounds as what we have in ayahuasca brew. So in ayahuasca brew, like most of the Westerners' eyes, because they were following what happened, for example, with the first anthropologists or ethnobotanists, that they went to Amazon or let's say Mexico, and they brought this attention to dimethyltryptamine, to DMT, to psilocybin. I would say this is why the psychedelic industry were enrolled into this tryptamine studies. But even if you do ayahuasca, or if you make ayahuasca in any tradition, the biggest part of like even partaking into the ceremony is really hammering the bark of the Banisteriopsis caapi tree, which is, we call them ayahuasca vine. And then they add the leaves of chacruna or Psychodermateria viridis plant, which has DMT. So the big part of the ceremony, which the men actually like hammering this to just like to the kind of maybe basically just break it down, and then they extract it with just boiling water. That's where the main compounds, which we call beta-carbonate, come in ayahuasca. And again, the understanding of us from ayahuasca is that ayahuasca is this DMT that's been potentiated with beta-carbolines, or beta-carbolines make like DMT orally active. And I think this is like just like a very surface of this story, because there has been ayahuasca brew that didn't have DMT, and DMT was only one of the additives to the ayahuasca wine later on. There were other additives that basically just this combination of DMT and beta-carbolines is what we know as a general ayahuasca, or as a 21st century ayahuasca. So the same compounds in ayahuasca exist in another plant, which is Syrian rue. Like the prevalence of the compounds are different. So the main compounds, they're called harmala compound. The most important ones are harmaline and tetrahydroharmine, and then there are all harmalol, norharmine, and harmon, and these are basically beta-carbolines. The difference is it's interesting, like in beta-carb, basically the amount of harmine in both of them is pretty much the same. But in ayahuasca, you have more tetrahydroharmine. In Syrian rue, we have more harmaline. And it's very amazing, because this plant is wild. It just grew by itself. For me, it was very interesting. I just recently saw this spring for the first time. I saw the plant closely and how it is. It has a flower It has a capsule behind the flower. And then when the flowers dries out and drops this capsule, inside the capsule, you have these little seeds, that the seeds has the most amount of these compounds, but the whole plant has beta-carboline too. And ecologically is not as endangered as ayahuasca, like the Banisteriopsis capi wine tree. And then also the amount of alkaloid is about like at least 5 to 10 times more.
Yes, nature, this is my personal belief, of course. So my personal belief is that nature, which we are part of nature, not separate. I think that's one of the biggest ailments that humanity has, where we see ourselves as separate. But that being said, nature, Gaia, creation, whatever you want to call it, has these beautiful ways of bringing the medicines that we need in all kinds of different geographies, in different iterations to us. I read once many years ago that the herb that is most needed will grow in the place where it's needed. So whether that's dandelion, whether that's rosemary, whether that's Syrian rue. So this is really fascinating. So I know people will be thinking that it's like, so Syrian rue, is that scheduled?
Syrian rue is not scheduled. Interestingly, the seeds are not scheduled, and even the active compounds are not scheduled in the United States. There are only 2 countries that has them scheduled. There's one is Canada, and the other one is France.
So interesting that Canada has it scheduled, right? Where you can basically own.
Yeah, that's why like we have our lab in the United States.
And that's why we get your products in the United States too, which I want to talk about in just a little while because I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So I think maybe just to finish about the effect, I want to add this because for me also the understanding came with time as I read more. So when we talk about psychedelics and what comes to basically the audience mind is this like mind expansive, like all of a sudden like very overwhelming experience of multiple hours that you really need an integration after to just feel what happens, like this like kind of a stimulated sensory that you have. And then so if I'm gonna maybe put that into a box, what happens under most of the tryptamines is that if you have read, let's say the Michael Pollan book also, what happens on the tryptamines is this interconnection between different part of the brain and also very high flush of thoughts. So we process a lot from our own thoughts. And then there's part of the thoughts that we don't actively have access to, which is like more from our subconscious. So that is how we have epiphanies or breakthroughs through, let's say, tryptamines. But put that aside. So basically under this effect, so we think a lot. We think very actively. Even microdosing is like a very little dose of that with psilocybin, with LSD or with DMT. So putting that aside, imagine that this is one side of ayahuasca, that you have the light, you have this geometry, you have these visions. But the other side that's not being talked about is enrollment to this state of, we call it hypnagogia. Hypnagogia is this liminal state between falling asleep and wakefulness. So for the audience that they have taken ayahuasca, you're constantly in that zone. You won't fall asleep. Like you are open to what is open to you through dreaming. So when we are dreaming, our consciousness, like basically it would be our dream consciousness. So it means that we are going through everything, if we remember it, and free of the physical and also in the time. Sometimes you remember, sometimes you don't remember. So there is for example, lucid dreaming is where you can wake up in your dream and then you can remember, and later on, if you can, for example, get agency. But before that, there is this liminal stage of going into sleep, or let's say waking up, that you are present while you're dreaming. And this is the big part of what beta-carbolines does. So hypnagogia or hypnagogia is when you go to sleep, and hypnopompia is when you wake up from the sleep. So it's actually where we are present, but our consciousness can open up to basically the consciousness of dream, the consciousness of having basically visions or imagination. Like if we have dream imagination and annihilation. Like kind of these are the non-existent realms that we can have access to beyond the physical realm. And this is how we have this access through this liminal state. If we take beta-carbolines alone and without any tryptamines, that's what the experience is. The Homa experience was different. They were mixing it with also like subtryptamines that was coming from ephedra. But the experience of beta-carbolines alone, there are referrals, let's say in TCAL, the book of Alex Shogan. There's actually a very interesting research about this by Claudio Naranjo, who was basically a Chilean psychiatrist. Like he actually injected beta-carbolines, let's say in IV format. And his patients it's interesting, like there is this book called The Healing Journey by Claudio Naranjo. There is a chapter on that book and it's called Harmaline and Collective Unconscious. That's the trip report of 3 of these patients under a clinical trial, like a very kind of measured clinical trial, controlled clinical trial. And then 5 minutes after injection, they have the biggest epiphany of their lives. And it's super interesting, like how this happens while they are awake. So if you want to really think about this subjective experience, the subjective experience is more like somewhere between dream, like falling asleep, and wakefulness, that we are still like open to having imaginations, and basically we dream some type of imagination. So this state has been practiced for also creativity, but on the let's say dreaming side is where our memory is also active. It's not overwhelming much. It's more the realm of patience. So you have to stay patient. And then the experience that you have on each of these compounds, for example, harmine, this is super interesting. I always say in my presentation, harmine has another name, and it's called banistrine in South America, and it's also called telepathy. So it was creating telepathy. It was giving this basically images, which is exactly like remote viewing. So you may have like flashes of realities, parallel realities. It's not like just something that's being built up. And it could be very short. But the reason that they call it actually telepathy, it was like it provides this, whatever that we don't understand, it's like extrasensory perception that it provides.
I will, after we finish recording, I will ask for your guidance on this, because I already have these kinds of experiences where I have these flashes and see things when I'm in a very relaxed state. So I would like to learn how to work with this more.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is like what I'm like, this distinction is exactly, I think, where the kind of like Eastern mysticism comes in. And then you've compared with this more of a shamanic mysticism. Like shamanic mysticism, it was mostly the shaman who knew the afterlife and then was transitioning in between. It was not like the person that was going through the healing. But now we have brought the medicine to people, and people have this transition. But in the Eastern mysticism, for us to have our eyes open to the unconscious, to this whatever that we don't know what it is, you had to be prepared. And this preparation, it's not very overwhelming. For example, a 5-MeO DMT experience is an ineffable experience that you can't even bring it to words. We don't have anything like that in that side of the world, at least. But the experience of beta-carbolines, or the experience of getting into hypnagogia in general, is this very subtle. It's very subtle. It's a very subtle connection of being still, not active thinking, and then getting in touch with what is coming from basically the world of imagination, the world of dream. And then that's how you're enrolled to receive information from the unconscious, from the ineffable, from the divine. So there are then, as you see, and also the effect of beta-carbolines is also very interesting. So what they do is that, unlike the tryptamines that make you think a lot, they actually make your brain to unfocusedness. So you're not really able to follow your thoughts. It's more like an alpha wave, like basic brain activity, which it's very interesting. You have to be, because like when we're talking about lucidity, we're talking about metacognition. Like these are like gamma wave or beta waves. But at the same time, we want, basically, there is this alpha waves, which are like more about the unconsciousness. So this is where we are merging or marrying the unconscious and consciousness together by being lucid in those moments to be able to see what's happening.
This is so interesting, Shauheen, because especially in our modern culture, of course, we're always focused or even multitasking, where we're not even that focused on one thing, but we're always like, our brain is always going. And if you think about something that a lot of people are also interested in, where they want to affect change in their lives, and often it's not by doing more and focusing more, it's actually by letting go. But so many of us can't even get into that state anymore because we've conditioned ourselves to always be so hyper focused. And just as a side note, these alpha states are really great states also when you want to work on manifesting something. What really interests me on a more, let's say, on a neuro side of this is, can you tell us a little bit about the role of beta-carbolines in, let's say, neurogenesis, and maybe also potential implications for treating neurodegenerative diseases? Because very clearly there's something happening in the brain that has a profound effect on how it functions. And so I'd like to learn more about that. Is there any evidence, any knowledge?
Yeah. Well, we know beta-carbolines mostly as MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. That is what contributes in the current discourse of pharmacology to what tryptamine does. Or let's say MAOI also came as a very first generation of antidepressants because they were allowing the tryptamines, basically the serotonin, to stay within this cleft between the neurons. But the reason for not continuing to be one of the ongoing antidepressant is because they are also making basically reactions with tyramines, which tyramines are coming from basically processed foods. There is danger, which is like the heart hyper, like basically tension or like high blood pressure. These are the side effect of, let's say, taking MAOIs or beta-carbolines with processed foods. And that because of that, it could be very dangerous. But this is more like a toxicology threshold that we have to know about. But back to what you said, in our research, there have been a lot of research about the neuroprotection effect of beta-carbolines. So they're really neuroprotective. Interestingly, what they do is that they're protecting basically these layers around the neurons that over time, some of them, they diminish and they are contributing to neurodegenerative diseases. It could be anything. It could be Parkinson, it could be Alzheimer's, it could be dementia, it could be Huntington, it could be, on an early, these are more like later stage after 35 or 40, 45, or even there are neurodegenerative diseases on the earliest, like Down syndrome, that there are also can be used, for example, for treatment, these are not treatment, these are like, or slowing down. Let's say, for example, it's being taken as a supplement. Basically, it slows down. It keeps the neuron, it protects the neurons. And it also it provides to neurogenesis too. But the only thing that we know about neurogenesis is from in vitro studies. In Petri dish, we know that it produced new neurons, but there hasn't been any human study. It's very difficult to measure that. And with that, it's very difficult to say that, let's say, if we create new neurons, if it's a good thing or it's not a good thing. But what we know, from our research, which is very interesting, what we know is that it affects memory basically, it improves memory. And it improves memory in multiple areas, because memory is it like, let's say, memory recollection? Is it memory at the encoding where you're creating the memory? It actually contributes like heavily into where you're creating the memory. It's like exactly you're learning something. And this is like through memory tests that basically we have studied. This is one area. The other area is actually that it affects the sleep cycle. And it doesn't really make you fall asleep, but it impacts the cycle of sleep, which are the REM, non-REM, and different part of the non-REM sleep. That is like a sleep, like a stage 1, a stage 2. And interestingly, it also, when it changes that, it contributes to sleep efficiency, which is like you sleep better. And like my experience from taking it for 2 months consecutively, it was very interesting. I slept less, brought it to about 4 hours. I was fully rested.
What was your baseline before the 4 hours?
Like usually I sleep around like 5.5 to 6 hours. Yeah, but 4 hours, I never had that. At 4 hours, I feel rested because like usually what happens is that you either have to start like basically not learning, like you're learning and your memory starts to like you feel the effect. If you don't sleep well over a long time, then you like it affects your learning and also affects your memory. But it was amazing just like feeling fully in my body and then have 2 more hours of studying, reading.
That's amazing. Yeah, my ideal is 8 hours, 7 hours is fine. 6 hours is I can do it, but it's not great. But if I could bring myself to 6 or 5 hours and feel great and have full cognitive capacity and physically also feel on point, that
Yeah,
sounds
I'm actually working on I'm finishing basically a paper about this, that what we know about like how much we have to sleep is about the saturation of exactly this space between our neurons, that like when you're awake, like it basically gets saturated with kind of neurotransmitters that contributes to something which call it, sleep pressure. So even when you fall asleep for two, like exactly like micro naps, so the micro naps like that, even 5 minutes or 2 minutes, it reduces that sleep pressure to about, let's say, 15% lower, or like 20% lower. Sometimes when you sleep 8 hours, that again maybe goes only, let's say, 20% lower. That's why people may sleep long, but they don't feel rested.
Yes.
Like your body may feel okay, but your mind still is not. So this is interesting. Like in the sleep research, you think that there's a lot because sleep has been there forever, but like the sleep research it's very interestingly, like there's so much wide space that I see, and beta-carbolines is definitely one of those topics to pursue. But
Yes.
back a little bit more on the psychoactive side, like on the psychoactive side, what beta-carboline does, it's first of all, like, it really is like a knob. Like whatever you turn, you may feel something differently based on different compound and different composition. But in general, this sense of lucidity that you are not really falling asleep, but you're falling asleep, but you're not falling asleep, but you are in this liminal zone. This is one area of, I would say, psychoactiveness. But the other effect is mostly, yeah, we call them onirphernia or hypnagogia. Again, it's exactly like being awake in the dream. This is what you get as the subjective experience. So the effect in general is more like, depending on what doses and what combination, for example, is being used, is more like it actually reduces the monkey mind. So you are able to let go, as you said, of your thoughts, of your following of your thoughts. This is exactly what you do under, let's say, open awareness meditation or many of the contemplative practices. We try to be present. We try to just bring our awareness into the moment. And interestingly, this contributes to that. And that's why we created this different formulations around these contemplative practices, because the idea is to be fully present while we are not following our thoughts, but we have lucidity. And this lucidity can be in full presence, which is exactly like meditation, or it can be on the other side of following lucidity, which is like lucid dreaming. And these are practices that they're both contemplative and they are not contributing to our expansion of consciousness.
Fantastic. And I can attest to your products. I love them and I want to talk about them in just a minute so that the audience also knows what offerings are that come from what is just so intriguing to me. Are a scientist and you are a mystic. You practice Sufi whirling meditation. And it is such a inspiring testament to the holistic approach you bring to your work and how you merge ancient wisdom with modern technology. And so I'd like to know, how has your practice of Sufi whirling meditation influenced you as a scientist, your research, and in your life?
I think for me, like the point that I started to develop a kind of like a daily practice, a contemplative practice, it was with measurement. I remember that basically I started with the very early on version of this Muse headsets, which is like a meditation basically just like a simple EEG measurement device that you just read with your phone. And for me, that was like finding where the zone is, what I'm looking for. Like this, like where my engineering side, like is always active, just for me to feel, okay, what I'm looking for, which zone I want to like tap into. And in general, basically exposure to Sufi teaching has always been my life. But for Whirling, it was very interesting. Why I like it was like I stood up. Basically, I was initiated and I turned. There was no practice. I really felt my like harmony, like equilibrium in turning. And you learn something by just like downloading it, and then later on you start to study it and then try to get more rigorous into what it does and what it does. This is on the side note, but I have been studying the neuroscience of Whirling for about 3 years. So I've been basically like recording my brain waves on Whirling that I'm hoping to. I was in a retreat this past weekend in Montreal that was like basically a Whirling dervish, and I enrolled a few of my other friends when they were turning, just to have some other subjects participating into that. But back into what Whirling does is exactly like what it's a meditation. It's a meditation in motion. Most of what we know about meditation is just like sit down and try not to think about anything, focus on your breath. What Whirling is meditation in motion. And we have other meditation in motion practices too. Like you can just obviously swing. For example, like the closest one that maybe people know about this is the Santo Daime, basically church, basically ayahuasca ceremony. What they do is that they are just like going with 2 steps onto the right, 2 steps to the left, and then like you do it for 7 hours while you're intoxicated. So what it does is that like you bring your body into an equilibrium, you bring your body into a movement that is basically in harmonious, like basically rhythm with what keeps you present and what keeps you like lucid and like aware about this somehow like this annihilation of the body and connection, but at the same time you are still like the self-awareness is there. And then you can go deeper, and then you can explore different state of minds that exactly like, again, like meditation, you can bring different taste into it. So, like the cross section of everything that I do, that if I'm going to categorize it, is this, like our awareness, like especially in the past, maybe 50 years or 20 years, there has been a lot of emphasis on consciousness. So consciousness has brought us to this active, as you said, like pursuing of everything, because we want to put into language, we want to know what it is, we want to be on top of it. But the primordial human was living with a combination of consciousness and unconsciousness. So it's also very important for us to understand the unconsciousness. It doesn't mean that we have to be unconscious. It means that we have to consciously know about the unconscious and acknowledge it. The effect, which is probably like 80% of our control of our life, is out of our control. So these experiences, these contemplative experiences, bring us to that level of, I would call it a dreamy state, whatever it is. If it's chanting, if it's zikr, if it's whirling, if it's meditation, if it's, I don't know, maybe martial art, if it's to this zone that like we actually create this distance between our basically just being conscious about our environment to full presence. Like then the presence can be independent of conscious or unconscious. The presence is where we actually perceive all this information. We are that lens, we are that observer. And from there, then basically this becomes the point for us, for our consciousness to shift, for us to receive from the other side. And any of these contemplative practices, including the plant medicine, does that. So I guess what we're witnessing with most of the psychedelics today, like taking ayahuasca, DMT, or all of these, I think they are amusing, and they're like, all of us are curious about this mind expansion. But at the end of the day, even though, let's say, you come up with the best integration, this is not something that you can do every day. This is not something that you can integrate into your life. Versus if we develop practices that can be, let's say, can be part of our life on a daily basis, that's the path. Like
Yes.
whenever we die or we live with unto that point, like this realization is the meaning of life to me, and then the quality of life.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing this, Shauheen. And to tie up our conversation, I would like to give our audience a brief overview of the products you are offering and that are freely available here in the United States and also in other parts of the world. You have products under the brand name of Ancestral Magi, which I personally love and also use. I love the lucid dreaming formula. So can you tell us about some of your offerings, please?
Absolutely. So what have offered is basically this non-scheduled compounds that are fully legal. Basically, these are psychoactive and legal supplements. We call them nootropic, or they are working on the cognition and memory under a brand called Ancestral Magi, as you said, or Magi Ancestral Supplements. There are 6 products that we actually started with, 4 that we call them sub-perceptive. Like 2 of them are sub-perceptive, that one of them is basically what contributes to neuroprotection. So this is a supplement that can be taken on a daily basis. And I recommend that to everybody because basically neurolongevity is something that longevity in general is something that we talk a lot about, but neurolongevity is really affecting the quality of life. Even though we live long, if you don't have memory, if you go through Alzheimer's, like the quality of life would diminish significantly.
What's the name of this particular?
So this product is called Amertot, or we call them Amertot Neurogenesis Supplement. They can take it on a daily basis. The other compounds, basically the other formulation that is sub-perceptive is basically a formulation called Horvatot. And these are the names that comes from Zoroastrian context. So Amertot it means immortality. So it's very related to longevity. And Horvatot, which means well-being, is related. Basically, it's out as a deep sleep supplement. But what it does is actually contributing to sleep efficiency, as I said. So you take it before going to bed, and over time, it regulates our cycles of dreaming. And even though we are not really remembering the dream, like when we have a more fragmented like cycles, then the quality of sleep changes. So these are sub-perceptive. If they take it, they are not feeling anything. But then we go to our we call them the mini doses, or we call them sub-intoxicating. So the effect is mildly psychoactive, which our flagship product is a meditation supplement that is called START. Is the word that I told you. It's about like basically just scrolling your consciousness to broader consciousness or to your mind. And a START is basically a formulation that you usually take it like about 10 to 15 minutes before sitting in meditation or before wanting to relax yourself. And then what it does is that it gives you about 45 minutes to 75 minutes of just being present, not really following your thoughts. So it slows down the monkey brain, and then it allows this kind of creates this state of in between, like dreaming and imagination, but in a very relaxed and tranquilized space.
And I'm not suggesting in any way or form to take a higher dose, but you could.
Yeah, what I suggest is that if you want to take this, give yourself 1 hour, because some people, they just take it and then they want to, let's say, do a 20 minutes meditation. Like you're gonna, the effect lingers for about an hour. Like you cannot just stand up, continue working, but give yourself that 1 hour. But this is something that has been very interestingly worked for many people. Then our next supplement is a lucid dreaming supplement that actually you tested it kindly. It's called Mang, and Mang is actually, again, the name of a potion. It's the name of a very intoxicating potion. And so Mang, what it does is actually, because people who are into lucid dreaming know that lucid dreaming is a practice. It's not like you just fall asleep and then you wake up in your sleep. Lucid dreaming, for those who don't know, is when you fall asleep, you wake up consciously in your sleep, and then you can even change the direction of your dream. So lucid dreaming is also exactly like meditation, a practice. And so what this does is very interesting. It provides 2 things. One is like it provides you with a lot of vivid dreaming. And 2, it keeps you a little bit awake. So this two, the superposition of these two effects helps with kind of enrolling you into lucid dreaming. So from there, you really have to be able to continue with the practice, which the practice is very rigorous. Sometimes you have to wake up in the middle of the night and take it. Sometimes you have to just, again, wake up and go to bed again. But the idea is very overwhelming. It's not, for some people, it's very natural, like they have been lucid dreamer. But actually, a friend of mine, she's writing a book about this.
Great.
And she was taking it for a month, and she had one of her kind of like most influencing lucid dreams on Mind, which was very interesting. And then we have another mini dose, which we call it means happiness. And it's actually a mood booster. It works very quickly, and it gives you like about 2 hours of being in a flow state. So if you want to do writings, or if you want to like just be on a like very smooth flow of higher mood, this is very helpful. And again, you can take it on a daily basis too.
Great. I don't think I've tried that one yet.
You haven't tried it? Yeah, we launched it last year in the Psychedelic Science Conference. We launched Ushta, and then we launched our macro dose, which the macro dose. So then we started with these lower doses, but we thought that, okay, like we just have to put more of instruction about the macro. The macro dose actually used the same name as Homa, which was the name of the intoxicant. And the effect is, if I'm going to put it in a one sentence, is exactly basically wakeful dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
It's imagination in a very in a state that create that subtle state for us to be able to connect with the imagination. For some people, it might be like intoxicating a little bit. It depends on, again, the neurophysiology as well. But a lot of people, like, they really enjoy it. And also, what is important about basically Magi supplements is that we created these as catalysts. So what the product that we want to really bring to our audience is these contemplative practices that they can adopt, and then for them to have an easier access to these planes or these zones is these catalysts that are Magi supplements. But they have to be taken with a practice. It can be a daily practice. It can be, let's say, like less regular practice. But the macro dose, I think like macro dose can be just like, you can do it once a month, or that's also a very interesting experience. And we have been thinking about another macro dose, but it depends on like how the feedback that we get. We are also like changing some of our formulations.
If you need another tester,
absolutely,
where to find
it
me?
It is very actually helpful for us, because we are working with a lot of very sophisticated, like very interesting souls, and the language that like people like you and so many of our friends like basically bring to these medicines, also helping us to be able to expand like what they do to more people.
Always happy to support, Shauheen. You're doing some really beautiful work that comes from the heart, that is deeply steeped in tradition and mysticism and in science. And I'm so glad we know each other. And for people who'd like to learn more about you or connect with you, where can they do so?
I think you can always message us on basically on our website. Our website is ancestralmagi.com, ancestralmagi.com. And yeah, we have basically just, if they want to connect to us or if they have any questions, like we have our customer service team that basically they send those emails to us. But I'm also available on LinkedIn with my first and last names. I'm happy to connect. And this is a work of, again, I guess where I'm finding myself here is exactly my social entrepreneurship side. And yeah, I'm super happy and open and welcoming to collaborate with whoever does something on the edge of anything that's more of, I would say, like a sustaining practice that contributes to longevity, contributes to resilience, contributes to more meaningful life, and also more connections.
Wonderful. I love it. And great closing words, Shauheen. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. It was really great to talk to you and learn more in depth than I already knew about your background and also where you're going. I'm excited for that.
Thank you so much, Ariana. It's always very inspiring for me also to work with you and to hear about what you do. and also to basically listen to the Superhumanize podcast and the amazing guests that you're hosting. Thank you so much for the great work that you do. I appreciate it.
You're most kind. Thank you so much, Shauheen. Until very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we'll be in touch then.